He's probably one of the most humble men I know. Of such, sometimes people don't understand. When Kiyama Shihan says, I don't know anything, it sort of took me a while to know what he meant. And I mean a while. I realized what he was basically saying is, I'm really learning, and I'm never going to be happy with what I have. So I'm never going to stop training. And we live in a culture now that's fast food. We learn things a lot faster. We were sort of a culture based on compliments. Everybody's good. Everybody does a great job. In Japanese, to study something, benkyo, is to study. To do Daito Ryu is shugyo, intense training, type of intensity that blends in some way, definitely with life, and also dealing with the concept of death. And Kiyama had this. Kiyama is as old school as you can get. Daito Ryu, for me, became much of my life. People would say, why Daito Ryu? And I have to say, it was that little man that threw me across the mat with almost doing nothing. And not really understanding what that was. And training more and more and more and realizing that that's Daito Ryu. The ability to do things that did not make any sense to me. I grew up in the Bronx. You probably can notice that by this great accent. In fact, my first introduction to the martial arts was in the Bronx. I had a good friend of mine that had been studying for several years, and he basically brought me to a dojo, and I met this relatively older gentleman that took several arts and created an eclectic art that was totally based on hard jiu-jitsu combat. I basically started Daito Ryu as I was leaving this art.
Initially when you start martial arts because you're interested for self-defense, as you train longer you want something deeper, something more meaningful. Daito Ryu had a substance to it, a mystery.
When I came to Daito Ryu, I realized how little I knew. So putting myself for many, many years a white belt, it was not an issue. It was a reminder how little I knew.
This art to me is a very high-level art that takes many years to really start getting the understanding and the basic fundamentals of what we do here.
And when you think about studying Daito Ryu, it sounds like there's you and then there's this thing that you do, you know? It's separate from you. But really, we don't study Daito Ryu. We train and we work to embody the principles of the arts that have been passed down for 1,200 years because they work.
It's an art that supposedly originated in 870 AD by Prince Taijin. And it went through the Minamoto family, and then eventually the Minamotos moved. And in their moving, they changed their name to Takeda, or Takeda, depending upon how you speak your Japanese. Some of the things that were interesting in studying the lineage, was where some of the techniques came from. One of the Minamotos would spend hours watching a spider entrap its prey. Hours. And when I say Daito Ryu, I can only speak of Daito Ryu Kodokai, because there were other branches of Daito Ryu. There are also branches of Daito Ryu that don't exist, with no connection to Japan, and really no connection to anything other than doing something harder and believing that's Daito Ryu. And to some extent, that's Daito Ryu's fault. By keeping the art so secretive, nobody really got to see anything. So they sort of felt that if Aikido is soft, then Aikijujutsu must be a little harder, which is the antithesis of what it is. The Kodokai is one of the leading branches of Daito Ryu. When Takeda taught students, he taught several students, and he judged by their stature, what they were as human beings, and decided who he would teach what to. And he was the first person to spread the art to the Japanese people. So this art was kept secret for a long time. So it wasn't taught in America until the middle 70s. Takeda realized that Kodo was a little gentleman, was sort of frail, similar to the stories of Kano picking people. And he basically taught Kodo the Aiki techniques. There was a gentleman who actually brought Daito Ryu to the United States from Japan, and his name was Yanazawa. I was sort of impressed with him. His jiu-jitsu was different than what I've seen, but he traveled with this little gentleman who was his uke, and he'd punished this uke pretty good. In fact, there's a time that he broke this uke's wrist. What I was watching when I was studying and looking at Yanazawa, I was seeing really jiu-jitsu, but not knowing at all what Aikijujutsu or Aiki was quite impressive. And this gentleman came to the United States several times a year, traveled all over the East Coast. I would follow him in the East Coast, because I was sort of impressed by his uke. Super impressed by his uke, who happened to live in California. But I remember being touched by him on a technique and saying, I've never felt that. And gently, he tossed me across the mat, again saying, I've never felt that. So he came up to me, I don't know how many years later, it was several, and he said to me, I see you're interested in Daito Ryu, with a very heavy Japanese accent. So I said, yes, Sensei. You come to a lot of the seminars? I said, yes, Sensei. And he did say to me, I will teach you. I had the ability to leave my practice for some time and constantly went back and forth to California and train with this Kiyama Sensei, who subsequently became Kiyama Shihan. I definitely found something in Daito Ryu that I had never seen, and I've had privileges within that time to have put my hands and been touched by some of the leading martial artists in the country and probably the world. And there was something different with Kiyama. There was a feel of attachment with Kiyama that I've never felt. He held me without holding me, without grabbing me. It was intriguing when he sort of walked me around, me being on my stomach, and him just moving me around the mat without closing his hand.
When you see him performing techniques, that gravitation that people look at as him is like, wow. To receive techniques from Kiyama Shihan is just, it's unbelievable. It's something that I've never felt before from anyone. It's that electricity that goes through you.
There was a presence about him that you don't see in many martial artists, but he was approachable. He was a very kind person. And I was lucky on that first meeting. I got to feel his technique. It was something that was truly amazing. Never felt anything like it before.
Every year, his skills got stronger and better because obviously, like Goldberg Sensei says, you can achieve Daito Ryu, you have to train.
It encompasses things from looking at it in a jiu-jitsu sense, breaking of the wrist, breaking of the elbow, breaking of the shoulder, breaking of the neck, things that were very combative. And understand, Japanese combative, a history of thousands of years, a history that gave birth to the Japanese sword, which to the Japanese is their soul. So everybody in today's world shows the sword as just a cutting implement. And in reality, one doesn't want to stain their soul. So when a samurai would draw his sword, it had to be for the right reason. You did not want to tarnish your blade. And it had a spiritual sense to the Japanese. The way Daito Ryu evolved was to stop the drawing of the sword, something that would not allow the attacker to get that sword out. Kiyama Shihan's training began when he was 7 years old. His father was a martial artist. He enrolled him in a martial arts class, and Kiyama hated it. His father basically told him, if you don't stay in the class, you can't eat. And Kiyama, at even 7, he must have had a big appetite, so he stayed and continued to train. Initially, when he was a young man, was in Takanouchi Ryu. When he was a little boy, I have pictures of him when he was 10 years old doing sumo. He also had the ability to do some judo. Without really working really hard, he created 2 national champions. This is a man who's just doing Daito Ryu. He has gifts in other arts, you know. In fact, the Kodokan, Kiyama was a shodan for 40 years. And they mailed him a Godan. They just mailed it to him. You know, it's like, are you serious? When he was 10 years old, we were in the middle of World War II. Sensei was sitting there fishing, and this is how he was told to me. It's very funny. I will use his accent. So he said, you know, to his friend, "Oh, this different." And his friend said, "What? Mushroom type." So he sat an island away from the bombing of Nagasaki. When the Japanese surrendered, many of the Japanese people thought that the emperor was a god. Samurai people, samurai families. So Kiyama went home and saw this family, 2 of them, 3 of them, that disemboweled themselves. And he was, unfortunately, he watched one of them. And they hid his father's sword, you know, so he wouldn't, you know, his wakizashi, his tanto, so he wouldn't do it. So he asked for a sword, he started screaming, and you know, being 10 years old, no, I don't know. You know, so he's had a tough life. During the war, he lived in a little baby cave, and they were strafing and bombing all the time, and he ate bugs, and, you know, he lived in a place that most humans couldn't live in. So finally, he was getting older. He was 20 years old. He says to his father, decided he's going to the United States. And his father said to him, "You will not talk to me until you're successful." So Kiyama came to the United States, worked as a landscaper as a young man, worked for somebody that was Japanese, made minimum wage, and raised a family. You know, and he worked harder than probably anybody would imagine. The word vacation doesn't even exist in his mind. The only vacation he's had is me taking him to New York. So he struggled a lot. I mean, he struggled a lot, building a family and things like that. And he worked really hard. Just an example, one of his sons, Danny Kiyama, who trains in Daito Ryu, is quite skilled. Sensei told me the story of him getting an award in California. And the award was he never missed a day of school from kindergarten to the 12th grade. Not one day of school. So I said, "Danny, how did you do it?" You know, I mean, and he looked at me and he says, "Dad, my dad was really in good health, but he had a little stroke and he was 86 years old, and he told my sister during Thanksgiving, 'I want to die.' And my sister looked at him and said, 'Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with your dad.' And my father went into the room and died 20 minutes later. You know, he chose when to die. My dad met Kiyama, and getting older, he let me know that Kiyama Sensei was okay to be my dad, and with blessings. It transcends instructor and teacher, and it's father. I love Kiyama. You know, he's part of me, and I'm part of their family, and it's an honor to have a father, a second father. You know, my dad was a great dad, and now I got another great dad, and it's just an honor to have a man like him in my life. This room is a tatami room, like you'd find in Japan. It's tatami that the Japanese people live on, and it was the way they used to train in tatami because they didn't have mats in those days. Prior to that, and in certain styles, they trained on dirt floors. This is the first scroll and the second scroll of Daito Ryu. The first scroll has 118 techniques. Aikido, Sorinji Kempo, Hapkido, come primarily from the first scroll. I was given the first scroll in Japan by the Menkyu Kaiden. I got it after, I think, my Okusandan. Just for historical value, the Dan ranking system is relatively new in regards to Daito Ryu, but it's probably no more than 150 years old. So initially people were given licenses to teach. Things like 5th Dan, 6th Dan, 7th Dan is not as important as Hidan Mokuroku, Jundairi Kyoju, and Dairi Kyoju. At this time now, in Kodokai, there was only one Menkyu Kaiden, so only one Menkyu Kaiden owns the highest license. I don't know how other systems do it. I don't even know how other Daito Ryu systems do it, but I can't speak of Kodokai. I don't remember staying in a hotel ever. I'd stay in Kiyama's house. I met his family when they were very young. I became, sort of connected to his family. And much, if not 90% of my training took place in his house. Just me and him. Kiyama Shihan was interesting. I used to think he was a throwback from the 16th century samurai. Because he didn't seem to act the same way anybody else did. When I was younger, I used to follow every single thing Kiyama did. Because I thought that if I did that, right, I would develop more than Daito Ryu. I would develop inside me part of the man. I was trying to be his student, and I knew that his specialty was bonsai, and I was going to put a bonsai in my front of my house. And at that time, Kiyama and I weren't really close. It was probably maybe 10 years into our relationship. So he was delicate with me when it came, not in the training, just when it came into the verbiage. So I plant this bonsai, and I asked Kiyama Sensei, Sensei, could you move this bonsai? He takes a piece of the bonsai, a leaf, puts it in his mouth, looks up, and is chewing it. And he looks at me and he says, Goldberg, you planted this 4 weeks ago. I can't move it. How he knew that was beyond my ability to figure out. And then as he entered the home, gently, he said to me, oh, by the way, Goldberg, this is not bonsai. which was quite gentle. Kiyama is as old school as you can get. Rank is zero important. Training constantly. He always used the word polishing your technique. Constantly polishing and polishing. It was about the art that I really didn't understand and the depth of that art. It was quite interesting doing some of the things that I did, which to me made zero sense. He'd bring me to Morro Bay, which was close to where he lived, and tell me to sit in the sand and watch the waves. Well, I really didn't think this was anything to do, but I did it because Kiyama said to do it. And he left me there. And would come back 45 minutes later, pick me up in his truck, and maybe later that day we'd go to the dojo, and I'd work with somebody that I've worked with, and they were very difficult, and it became easier. And when I asked him why, I got the same answer. You super stupid. Understand nothing. Well, I thought looking at a wave has nothing to do with martial arts. And then I was fortunate. probably very fortunate not to be able to throw some other gentleman in the dojo I was in. And I asked Kiyama Sensei, I can't work with him. And the first thing he did was look up. Oh, maybe sometime. I had no idea why he was looking up. But then it became quite obvious. Let's put Goldberg sitting in the sand in the rain, because the waves change. So he did that. He left me, just like he did before, in the pouring rain. And again, drove away with his truck and came back. And again, I went to the dojo, and for some reason, the technique that I was doing on this gentleman was significantly better. And again, I asked him, and he said, "Oh, you really super stupid. You don't understand nothing. And someday, Goldberg, you'll understand." But he did everything in his power, everything, to push me away. In fact, he has a very interesting story about me. He taught me a technique and said to me, "Goldberg, you have to do this technique 1,000 times. Then you'll understand something." Well, I didn't realize that he was talking about a year. I did it in 24 hours. And when I called him again, and you know the answer, super stupid. And that's a story that Shihan Kiyama has told for years. In fact, in Daito Ryu there are very few names. We call the technique the 1,000-time technique, because super stupid, like Goldberg, did it 1,000 times. The repetition was necessary for the evolution of the technique, but it wasn't what he was looking for. He was looking for the depth, to find the changes, the subtleties that occur as you continue to do something. But there's also the problem of doing something wrong 1,000 times. So you'd learn by shifting the technique into something different. It didn't come that way in 24 hours. It took years, and I was lucky to watch Kiyama's technique evolve. So I saw something going forward that was happening in regards to his abilities, which I was sort of in awe of. But, people were also telling me, "Sensei, your technique is changing." So what did I do? I tried to figure it out, which made less sense. And I realized, as I trained more and more, this art had a depth that was infinite. I learned more from my students than my students learned from me. And the reason that is because I know more, so I could feel more. And I could feel people differently and how they attack and things like that.
The best surgeons I know are very calm people. Their pulse rate probably never goes above 70, despite the situation. And I think Daito, that ability to relax and focus and be totally connected to everything around you, definitely has elevated my surgical technique.
It's sort of like it could be selfish, it could be looked that way, because I'm doing this, partially for me. But I've worked really hard to create a group of students who are very serious with Daito Ryu and train very hard. And that's basically all I ask my students to do.
And Goldberg Sensei actually helped me realize the connection between my work, my professional work, and the martial art on the floor, that they were really one and the same. And so recognizing that has actually made my connection stronger with operating with my patients and with dealing with life situations.
Whether you like it or not, it becomes a part of you. It changes you on some deep level, but it's kind of slow, gradual process. You stand still and think about it and say, "Wow, I kind of changed."
Daito Ryu eventually becomes an internal art, the Japanese internal art. It sort of transcends the combat. But in the Aikido world, there's a lot of soft connecting or hard connecting with the attacker. And again, like I said before, without grabbing the attacker. And I think the contact between two humans in a very very gentle, physical, yet martial way changes who you are. Because most martial arts are not based on feel, they're based on form. And don't get me wrong, Daito Ryu, initially, every technique is based on form. But later on in your studies, 30 years or so, you move to a place where you start doing the higher level techniques, the Aiki techniques. They become who you are. They should become who you are on the mat. And you should be able to bring that off the mat and live your life by connecting to individuals and living a life of harmony. When you're doing techniques at a higher level, you're sort of connecting to the individual's, I could say, essence to some extent. I think it's a necessary thing to spread Daito Ryu. Many of the reasons is a lot of arts came from Daito Ryu. They were sort of kept a secret, you know, and sometimes you keep a secret long enough, nobody knows you exist. During World War II, they couldn't teach jiu-jitsu. Everything became do, aikido, judo, karate-do. The art hasn't really been around to the Japanese public more than 19th century. So this art has been around in the United States not a long time. So what's happened is a lot of styles have called their techniques Aikijujutsu, and they thought it was hard Aikido, soft Aikido, because they never saw true Aikijujutsu or true Aiki. So they made their own impressions. I was no different than they were at the early days. When I got to be somewhat proficient, I made up my mind that one of my goals was to take Daito Ryu and then spread it as best as I could. And as the Menkyu Kaiden and as Kiyama would want it spread. I am honored to follow in the footsteps that still exist of Kiyama Shihan. I truly want to spread this art. I want to spread it to anybody who wants to train, that seriously wants to train. It's not about what rank you have. It's not about just take off your belt, put on a white belt, and just train. I'd like to leave a legacy for me, right, that I continue to spread it. But the true legacy goes to Kiyama Shihan. Without him, I couldn't tie my belt. I can't say enough about the man. People don't get a second dad, and I got one. And I just bow to you, Kiyama.